Good morning and welcome to this webinar brought to you by Global Victoria and Austrade about the Modernisation of Cosmetics Regulation Act, or MOCRA, in the US. During this webinar, you'll hear an update on FDA compliance and regulatory requirements for the cosmetic industry in the US. As many of you may know, this is the third webinar that Global Victoria and Austrade have brought to you on this complex topic. But before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today, the peoples of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here with us today. I'd also like to let you know quickly that we'll be recording today's session so we can share that with you afterwards. Now, it's great to see so many of you online. I think we've had about 90 people register for today's session, which is fantastic. It just goes to show how important the US market is for this sector. And it's really exciting to have brands from all across Australia joining us, as well as our colleagues from the various state and federal trade agencies. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lizzie Moffat. I look after the beauty, wellness and personal care sector for Global Victoria. I'm based here in our Melbourne office, and Global Victoria is the state government of Victoria's trade agency. Also joining us on the call today is Mildred Ruiz-Leal, or Millie, from Global Victoria's New York office, and Anjali Jain from Austrade's New York office. And both Millie and AJ look after the consumer goods sector in the US for our respective trade agencies. And I'm sure many of you have met both AJ and Millie in your time, but they are a wonderful resource for both Global Victoria and Austrade for this sector, so we're really lucky to have them. Now, I'm just saying a very quick hello, welcome to you all this morning. So before I do hand over to Millie to formally introduce our guest speaker for today, I would like to also welcome and acknowledge our wonderful guest speaker, Angela Deesh, partner at Amin Wasserman Gunani. Thank you for your time, Angela, for sharing your knowledge with us. I think many of you joined the first two webinars that we presented late last year and early this year, which Angela was very kind with her time then as well. I don't want to take up too much time here. I think I'll hand over to Millie now to make formal introductions and give you a brief overview of what today's session is going to be about. Over to you, Millie.
Yes, thank you, Lizzie. Welcome to our webinar on U.S. cosmetic regulatory requirements. Thank you all for joining us today. And as Lizzie mentioned, this session is designed to guide you through the latest regulatory updates and requirements impacting the cosmetic industry in the U.S. And I want to give you an overview of what we'll cover. So we'll begin with a brief overview of MOCRA. This includes new obligations, a quick review of facility registration, and how MOCRA impacts your business. And next, we'll dive into essential compliance areas, including product listing, adverse event reporting, record keeping, among others. And finally, we'll touch on other requirements, such as the California Prop 65 and the new Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR, rules. It is our objective, and we hope that by the end of the session, you have a comprehensive understanding of the current regulatory landscape for cosmetics in the US. Now, this webinar will be presented by the recognized expert in Angela Deesh, who has Amin Wasserman Gunani's Cosmetics Industry Practice Group. Angela assists companies in complying with legal and regulatory requirements applicable to the manufacture, marketing, and distribution of cosmetics and over-the-counter drugs in the US. She chairs multiple joint committees with NSF International, including those organic personal care and good manufacturing practices for over-the-counter drugs and cosmetics. And she's also a member of the Independent Beauty Association, where she sits on the Technical Regulatory Committee. She's the author of the blog cosmeticsandthelaw.com. She speaks at industry conferences and seminars and conducts many educational training programs. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Angela and encourage you to write questions on the chat box. Thank you so much, and thank you, Angela.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here again. It's exciting to see just how many people have registered for the webinar and have already logged in here today. So thank you so much for hosting. I do appreciate it, and I really do enjoy sharing my experience and expertise in this area to try to help companies enter the United States in an effective manner and in a way that minimizes their regulatory and legal risks. So I'm glad that you're all here today. So I am going to share my presentation now. All right. Can somebody confirm that you can see that?
Let's say that.
Wonderful. So we have a lot to get through today, but as Millie mentioned, if you have any questions while I'm on the slide as we're going through, feel free to enter it into the chat box, and they will be monitoring it and letting me know if there's a question so that I can answer it while we're on the slide. And then hopefully we will save some time at the end of the presentation, so if you have any questions, you can ask more questions at the end. So as she mentioned, here's just kind of the basic agenda that we will be going over today. I already went pretty extensively into the MOCA requirements in the prior two webinars we did. So this is going to be a little bit higher level. So if you do have any specific questions on particular elements of it, please, enter that into the chat box. So here is a MOCA timeline, which if you were at any of the prior presentations, you would have seen something similar. So product listings for products that were already in the marketplace were supposed to happen December of 2023. However, FDA did not get that portal open in time really for people to do it, so they extended the enforcement deadline until July 1. We have not necessarily begun seeing enforcement. I think FDA is still in the process of trying to work out some glitches with the portal and with their SPL X Forms system, but we are already seeing inspection requests for facilities. So, if you have already registered your company, don't be surprised if you get a facility investigation request to happen in sometime in the near future. So we were anticipating to see a fragrance allergen transparency proposed rule coming out at the end of July. That has not yet come out. So even though it's listed here as being July of 2024, who knows? The FDA has done a notification that it's going to be doing a proposed rule, but there has not been actually a proposed rule released to the public yet. Once it does, there will be a comment period, and then there will be a proposed final rule, and then it would be adopted. And after that point, the rules regarding fragrance allergen transparency would not go into effect until 12 months after that. So at this point, we wouldn't see the fragrance allergen disclosures likely being required on a label until likely sometime in 2025. So now as of December 29, 2024, there's some additional labeling requirements that are going into effect, including you must have either a domestic address, so a U.S. domestic address, physical address, a U.S. domestic phone number, or electronic contact information on labels. And there's also some new professional labeling rules. And then by the end of this year, we are also supposed to be seeing a proposed rule for good manufacturing practices. So far, haven't seen any, or heard anything about whether or not they're going to make that deadline. Given that they missed the fragrance allergy deadline, it's possible that the GMP deadline will get pushed off as well. And then by the end of December of 2025, hopefully we will likely have a GMP filing rule by then if they get it done in time, the proposed rule in time. And then we should have a report regarding PFAS. And I'm going to talk about each of these a little bit more as we go along. So facility registration, I did not change this slide from the prior presentations because it really does cover everything succinctly. The key points are, though, if you are a manufacturer and you don't qualify as a small manufacturer, then you would need to register, and you have to register within 60 days of 60 days of first manufacturing cosmetic products. And then you have to re-register every other year. And then if there's any informational changes to the information that you provided in the registration, you have to update your registration within 60 days. So if you are a contract manufacturer providing services to third parties and you get new brands that you are manufacturing for, you would have to update that information to the FDA within 60 days of manufacturing that new brand's product. So that would be part of that information. One of the key aspects of this also is you do have to have, if you were a facility registering as a cosmetic facility, you do have to have a U.S. agent who's physically located here in the United States. And that U.S. agent acts as pretty much just a communications liaison between you and the FDA. This is because, the FDA agents work the hours, of really pretty much East Coast here in the United States. So they need to be able to get a hold of somebody within the US time zones during their business hours. So it's kind of one of the reasons they do that, to make it very easy. Now, if you are manufacturing a product and you are not registered and that product is sold in the United States, that would be considered a prohibited act under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act and can result in multiple penalties, including your products being held at the border. So it really is important that this registration step is handled. So the
Angela,
information.
I was just going to say a couple of questions just popped in, which I think you might be addressing. Two people just asked if a website can suffice versus a U.S. address.
It can, yes. The statute actually specifically says a domestic address, phone number, or electronic contact information, including such as a website. So,
Okay.
so
And
here, why don't we get through just this the facility registration? That way, if it's anything to do with that, I'll have already answered it. So the basic information that's required when you register a facility is your facility name, facility FEI, which is a facility establishment identification number, the address, the name of the owner or operator, email, phone number, the U.S. name, the U.S. agent, and then any of the brand names and categories. We'll talk about the categories in a little bit. So that's the basic information that has to be provided in a registration. So if any of this information changes, so the owner of the facility changes, you move addresses, or like I said, you get new brands that you're manufacturing for, or maybe you're no longer manufacturing for some brands, that information would have to be updated within 60 days of the change. Here's just some basic information about whether or not being able to identify, well, do I have an FEI? Because many companies actually already have an FEI without even realizing it. If your company has had any kind of interaction with the US market or with the FDA, or you've done any kind of importing into the United States, you likely may already have an FEI number. So this is where you can go to check to see if you do. And then if you don't, you would email this address here, providing this information to them. And then within a couple of weeks, they'll respond and provide you an FEI number that you would use. So pretty easy. The facility registration can be done electronically through the CDER website, or you can submit a paper submission, which is available at this link here. There's one additional site that you're able to do it on, but that's a little bit more complicated. So I find that these two are usually the best. All right. Were there any questions regarding facility registration?
There was one that was, I'm sure I'm not quite understanding it. With proposed rules, are there a vague outline of what the ruling may be so companies can preempt packaging to include ruling just in case?
Oh, regarding fragrance allergen, maybe, is that what I'm going to assume that that's what it's talking about. In the industry, many of us think that it's likely to be similar to the EU's fragrance allergen disclosure requirements. There's also a requirement which we will cover later in California for disclosures of fragrance allergens. So it's suspected or anticipated that it's going to be something like that. Unfortunately, however, I don't have a don't have a crystal ball to to confirm at this time, but that's what is anticipated. The FDA is not necessarily looking to try to make entering the US market more difficult than it already is. And so, many of the rules that are starting to be considered by different states and by the FDA are incorporating those international requirements in some of the larger jurisdictions like the EU. So if you are already complying with the EU disclosure requirements for fragrance allergens, there's a chance that you may already meet the requirement that will happen here in the United States. But yeah, we won't know until that comes out for sure.
Okay. And if you are a brand owner in Australia and have an Australian contract manufacturer, do the manufacturers need to register their facility for the brand to be able to sell in the US, or do you require a US agent?
So the manufacturer would have to register and they would need a US agent. I have seen certain situations where the manufacturer is like, no, we're not going to register in the United States. Yes, we don't qualify as a small business, but we're just not going to do it. And in that case, the brand can actually register the manufacturer. They can give this information. Because if you recall, this information back here, none of this is really confidential, right? I mean, if you're doing business with a manufacturer, you would have all this information. And even the facility identification number, if you were trying to do the registration and maybe you didn't know their FEI number, someone like me could find their FEI number. And if they don't have an FEI number, well, then you could always email and you could say that you are representing them as a third party. And that you are selling your products as a cosmetic. This is your manufacturer, and they're refusing to register, so you're doing it for them. Because in MOCRA, it does actually provide for that type of consideration.
Thank you,
but
Angela.
it is 2 steps. You've got facility registration, you have product listings. There's no way to merge those 2 things. It is 2 very distinct steps that have to happen.
We do have several more questions, but we'll hold off so you can continue.
Okay, good idea. Okay, so the product listings, as I mentioned, this is a completely separate step, and this is falls on the responsibility of the brand. So it is the responsible person is defined by MOCRA as the company whose name is on the label. So whoever company name is on the label with their address, that's considered the responsible person. Now, some brands, international brands, that name might be whatever their name is in their country of origin, right? Whatever your name is in Australia with your address. Some brands, though, have US distributors and or maybe they have a US arm and they have that name on their label. So it would be whoever is on that label is the one who would be responsible for making sure product listings happen. Now, you can contract out to a third party, right? I do product listings and facility registrations for companies, or you can handle it yourself. It's just that you are the one that's responsible for making sure it gets done. So existing products had to be listed, as I mentioned previously, by December 2023. That was extended to July. Have not yet seen enforcement letters. Doesn't mean it's not happening. It could be happening kind of behind the scenes and they're just not being made public yet. But I also haven't necessarily heard that there's been any blocking entry of products for failure to list yet at the borders, but we do anticipate that might end up happening. So products have to be listed within 120 days of first marketing the product in the United States. And then the information, which will be on the next slide, it has to be, if you list information in a listing and it changes for some reason, that has to be updated on an annual basis. So if you were to list your products in June of 2024, your annual update is due June 2025. This is a little different than OTC products. If any of you have drug products that you've done listings for, there's an annual renewal period from October through December of each year. This does not have that annual like renewal period. It's an annual basis based on when you did your initial listing. So I want to clarify that because that's something that's been a little confusing for people who have, because right now is the renewal period for drugs and they're like, oh, we listed in February. Do I have to renew? Already, and that's not the case. So now a single product listing suffices where a product differs only with respect to fragrance, flavor, color, or quantity of contents. So if I have a lipstick and I have that lipstick in 10 different shades, then that's one listing, all right? You would just include all the colors in the listing with it. And again, failure to comply with this is also considered a prohibited act under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. Here are the basic listing requirements for a product. It's not very much information. You don't have to provide the website. You don't have to provide the label, a picture of the label. You don't have to provide your company physical address. You only have to provide the name of the company, the phone number, the name of the product, the category of the product, list of the ingredients, and the FEI number of the facility where the product is manufactured. And it's every single facility where the product is manufactured or processed. So if you are mixing in facility A and you're filling in facility B and you're labeling in facility C, A and B have to be registered. C, just because you happen to throw a label on it or you put that container into a box, just simple packaging, that wouldn't require that facility be registered. But anywhere that you think of it this way is any of the facilities where your product is processed, where the formulation itself, right, the lotion, the cream, if it's touched by the machines at that facility, that actual cream, not the outer container, but the actual cream, then that facility needs to be registered. Because if the cream is being touched by those machines, there's an opportunity for contamination, right? So think about it that when you're considering, well, which facilities need to be registered, right? And all right, so that was that section. Were there some questions that you would like me to take a look at?
There were questions, but I'm just afraid we're going to be running out of time. Maybe we can at the end.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, so now we're going to jump into extended producer responsibility and recycled content requirements. This is a very new area here in the United States. I provided you some resources here. These are the different state laws that are currently in effect. There are some additional states who are considering legislation, but here are links to the states that are currently in effect that you should be aware of. So if you're already shipping product into the United States, these laws right now are supposed to be getting complied with, unless you fall within an exemption. And that presentation in itself is like a full hour. So I'm not going to go into the details of like what every exemption is in every single state or anything like that. But just to let you know, this is something you really need to have on your radars. So what is extended producer responsibility? It's pretty much a way of taking the end of life of packaging and the burden of that and shifting it away from local governments to the producers, right? So there in 2024, the last time I checked, there was more than 11 states that introduced this EPR or for packaging legislation. And as of May, there were at least 7 states that had moved their EPR bills out of committee. So some of those bills have died, some of them have been enacted. But the ones, so I'm not going to the details of all of them. Those resources I provided you are the ones that are currently law. So there are 2 primary policy approaches that we're seeing in the states, and that is either these comprehensive EPR programs where there's like reporting obligations, maybe annual fees, and right, so they're like really moving forward pretty quickly. And then you have the second approach, which is where the states are conducting studies to try to determine, well, what are our specific state needs, right? What are the possible approaches that we can take with our EPR programs? So, these are the two different kind of approaches that we're currently seeing in legislation. So as I mentioned, it shifts that accountability. States currently with the laws, I provided you the links already, are California, Colorado, Maine, Missouri, Oregon, and Washington. And if you are shipping product into the states of Washington and the state of New Jersey, and you ship more than, say, 1 ton of a category of resin, so plastic, into the state, so 2,000 pounds, I don't know what it is in kilograms, then you are required to register with the Department of Ecology of Washington, or the state of New Jersey, the Department of Environmental Protection, Division of Sustainable Waste Management. The registration process for both of those are fairly easy, except Washington does require that you identify the amount in pounds of the product that you are sending into the state. So not the product filled with not the container filled with product, but the actual container itself, right? So to do that calculation, it's generally that you're asking the supplier, well, how much does each unit weigh? And then you're doing the multiplication to determine how much product went to that state. And if you don't know, well, I don't know how much product went to that particular state, I just know how much went to the United States, you can do a calculation based on that, and how much and what the population of Washington is. It's a little more detailed than I intend to get into, but so if you're looking into this and you're like, oh my gosh, we do send quite a bit of product here to United States, I need to understand this more. I suggest hiring someone here in the US to help you with that. I do register clients for both of those programs. And like I said, it's not necessarily difficult to do. It's just understanding how to do it and where to go for it. So, all right. So California, Colorado, and Oregon, they are taking a different approach. They have a very comprehensive plan. However, they are requiring that manufacturers or producers register with producer responsibility organizations. These are the producer responsibility organization is a third party. It's a non-governmental entity. And it has to be an organization that's been approved by the state. So currently, California, Colorado, Oregon, as well as Maine, and one other that I can't remember. Anyways, they have all approved this particular organization called Circular Action Alliance. And you can find, that's their address right there. So you can go to their site. It's to register is literally takes less than a minute. It's your name, it's your email, it's your company name. It's super simple. They will then ask you to sign an agreement saying that you're participating, and they are in the process right now of developing their rules and their outline of how their data collection is going to work. And they're having workshops, I believe almost monthly or at least quarterly. So you can sign up at that same URL to get more information from them about how, what they are doing and be a part of that rulemaking process if you're interested. Now, another big thing that we're seeing is recycling claims. So here in California, where I'm located, SB 343 was enacted, and it is potentially restricts the use of any kind of recycling claim. And we are waiting for CalRecycle to issue its final material studies report. They've already issued a preliminary report. So my suggestion is you can go to the URL, it's right down here at the bottom. And so if you want to know, okay, well, I have a recycling claim on my package. If I ship it into California, is it going to get me in trouble? is I suggest going to this URL, and you can find the material study report is right on that page. And you can take a look at, the different type of resin codes, find what your product is, what your type of packaging is, and see whether or not it meets the recycling criteria here in California. And that criteria is that it has to be recycled it has to have a 60% recycling rate, and it has to be recycled in facilities that provide services to at least 60% of the population. It seems kind of difficult to determine, right? Well, I'm not saying that the material study is easy to read, because it's not, but you can find the information, within it, that and hopefully be able to narrow down. Okay, well, I have this particular resin code. It's this particular like structure and so forth. I mean, it's very detailed, the study report that they've issued. So, but if you have any questions, when you're reviewing it, please let me know. I'm happy to assist. Now, when I mentioned about the chasing arrows, like I'm talking about even in your resin code descriptor. So this line here, where the symbol chasing arrows, as you notice, those are chasing arrow symbols, which implies that every single one of these resin codes is recyclable. Well, the laws have changed here in the States, and resin codes have to be just in a equilateral triangle, like you see here on the far right. So now it appears, based on the preliminary material study, that both the resin codes 1 and 2, or the PET and HDPE, will both be considered recyclable here in California. But cosmetics, unfortunately, have a little bit of a problem, because if you have a tube and that tube has lotion in it, well, is that tube recyclable, or is the lotion that's in that tube going to contaminate the recycling stream? Right. So there is potential issues for cosmetic companies in particular. And so if companies are going to make a recycling claim, and they understand that the formulation that's in that tube is going to contaminate the recycling stream, well, then they need to provide instructions to consumers about how do they clean it, right? Do they need to cut the tube open and rinse it out and then throw it away? Now, we expect to see guidance from the Cal Recycle on these issues, but as of yet, they haven't provided it. So here's a little bit about who a producer is. I mentioned it a little bit, but overall, I'm not going to read all of it, but overall, it's the person who manufactures the product and imports it into the state, right? So if maybe you're not actually manufacturing it because you use a contract manufacturer, but you are the one responsible for the manufacturing of it, and you are the licensee for the brand or the trademark, or you're the license holder for the brand or the trademark, and you're getting it into the state, well, then you are considered the producer. That's kind of the general gist of who is a producer. But like I said, each of these states do have some exemptions for small businesses or de minimis producers. Like in Washington, if you have aggregate sales of less than $1 million a year in the state of Washington, or less than 1 ton of plastic is shipped into the state, then you would qualify as de minimis producer. But even those producers, even the de minimis ones, still have to report. You still have to fill out the paperwork for the state of Washington. You just wouldn't be obligated to pay any fees. So. All right, so minimum post-consumer content. This is coming up very soon. This is beginning January 1 of 2025. If you're selling products into the state of Washington, then there is required for personal care products, so cosmetics, a 15% post-consumer recycled content plastic by weight. Now, that's not necessarily product to product. It's overall. So if I ship 5 products into the state and maybe one is not made from any PCR, but I have another one that's 100% and one that's 80% and one that's 20% and one that's 10%. So I've got 2 that are arguably below. Well, I would take the aggregate of all of that, the average, right? To say, okay, here's my PCR content by weight of all my products coming into the state. But I am seeing that this is becoming a problem for cosmetic companies because one, a lot of them didn't realize that this law was now on the books, and they're racing to try to make sure that they get in, their products transferred over into new packaging. But when you do that, you then have, well, is there going to be a stability issue, right? You need to test your product for compatibility, to make sure it's going to work. And then there's just the whole supply concerns, right? Is there enough packaging available for every single cosmetic company to meet this PCR? I don't know. So if you have not yet looked at this, I suggest getting on it as soon as you can. There is a sell-through period. So it's not that all products in the state have to meet this deadline, but it's any products that were manufactured before January. So any products manufactured before January 2025, this doesn't apply to, but any products manufactured after January 1, 2025 must meet this for shipping into the state of Washington. And like I said, there is a sell-through period. So any of those products manufactured before January can continue to be sold within the state. There is also coming down the line some recycling rate requirements. Now, this is actually a bit merged in with the PRO, the producer responsibility requirements. So this is what the PRO is working towards making sure happens. And so by the year 2032, 100% of packaging in the state has to be recyclable or compostable. And there needs to be a 25% cut in plastic packaging. And so we have these, it's a stepped process. So by 2028, the recycling rates have to be at least 30%, and then by 30 is 40%, and then by 2032, it's supposed to be down to 65%, or not less than 65%. So, these are pretty hefty goals. We'll see if there's some, changes or some adjustments to the deadlines as really just supply issues become, more and more relevant and known by the state and the agency who's responsible for, the enforcement of these rules. So are there any questions on EPR? I know I kind of had to race through it, given we're covering a lot today.
Yeah, there is one. Are there packaging export trigger thresholds in California, Colorado, and Oregon?
I'm not sure. Export trigger thresholds?
Like, I guess sales? Allison, if you want to clarify.
Oh, like it for exemptions?
Sales. In terms of like a minimal sales threshold.
There is. Yeah. I believe California, it's 5 million. If you're less than 5 million in the aggregate, like in the United States, I'm pretty sure that's what the threshold is. And then Colorado, I believe, is identical to Washington. So it's that 1 ton or less than 1 million in the state.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I just realized, I'm using this is our old logo. I just noticed. I even had our marketing person send me the correct one today, but I opened up the wrong one. So my bad. Just ignore that old logo. Before we share the PDFs, maybe I'll send you ladies the correct one. Okay, so ingredient bans and restrictions. Again, here's a resource page for you. So you have links to all the different laws. I am not going to discuss all of them because a lot of the ingredient restrictions are in line with like the EU ingredient restrictions. So if this was an hour-long presentation just on the ingredient restrictions, I would cover all of them. But instead, I'm just going to focus on Washington, because Washington is one state that currently has these ingredient restrictions coming into effect on January of 2025, so just a couple months, that go beyond the EU's restrictions. So this is the state that seems to be causing the most problems. In particular is the, oops, I go to click to highlight and then it switched the page. So in particular is the formaldehyde and chemicals determined by the state to release formaldehyde. So this involves an entire array of or implicates an entire array of preservatives that are currently legal in, as far as I know, most other countries, nearly all other countries, but are now not going to be legal in the United States, at least in this particular state. So the state of Washington. The PCPC, the Personal Care Products Council, as well as the Independent Beauty Association, which are two trade associations here in the United States, have been trying to negotiate with the regulatory folks in the state of Washington regarding this issue, but they have not made really any headway whatsoever. So, this is problematic for the industry. And at least maybe not so much for like the natural and organic sector of cosmetics, but certainly for the more conventional brands that use, any of those preservatives. So that's one of the reasons I really wanted to make sure that you were aware of this. The penalties for violating this law are pretty hefty, and it's on I believe it's like $5,000 for the first incident, like per incident. And then it's, I think, $10,000 for recurring. However, the state has not yet really explained, well, what does that mean per incident? Does that mean per product or per SKU or per shipment? Right? So those numbers can get big really, really fast. And the other issue is for lead. So lead is, as many of you likely know, a potential contaminant in like color additives. So this 1 part per million, it's my understanding that for a lot of color cosmetics, that can be almost impossible to get below the 1 part per million. So, this is something you should be very aware of. And we anticipate that not only will we see government enforcement of this, but we may actually also see an increase in litigation around this topic. So it can become quite expensive for companies. There's also PFAS prohibitions. Excuse me, needed a drink. PFAS prohibitions that are going into effect. PFAS are a class of fluorinated organic chemicals that contain at least one fully fluorinated atom. We see these in a lot of like waterproofing type applications, but in cosmetics, they're often used to condition and smooth the skin or the hair, and they help with product consistency and texture. Now, numerous states, other than just the ones that are listed here, California is listed twice. Sorry about that. Colorado, Maryland, and Washington this ban goes into effect in 2025, Vermont in 2026, and Maine in 2030. And there are numerous other states that are looking at similar bans. So there are thousands and thousands of ingredients that have PFAS in them. So my suggestion is that you do a really careful audit of your ingredients to confirm whether or not any of your ingredients are considered to be PFAS. And then if they are, it would be a good idea to start reformulating ASAP. So. Another ingredient ban is regarding the non-chemical sunscreens, or I'm sorry, the non-mineral sunscreens products. So there are 2 counties in the state of Hawaii. So it's the Hawaii and Maui counties who have enacted bills that prohibit the sale or distribution of non-mineral sunscreen. So the only sunscreens allowed in those 2 counties, which would be 2 islands in Hawaii. So they only allow like the zinc and titanium dioxide, and there is a penalty up to $1,000 per incident. There is an exemption for prescriptions, but how many sunscreens are prescription sunscreens? I mean, I suppose if somebody had an allergy to titanium and zinc, and then they got a prescription from their doctor, they'd be able to use the chemical sunscreens. But other than that, I'm not aware of really any prescription sunscreens. All right, and now some additional reporting obligations. So under the California Safe Cosmetics Act and SB 312, which is this CFFIRTKA, it stands for the Cosmetics, Fragrance and Flavor Ingredient Right to Know Act. This is a requirement that, one, if you have any ingredients in your product that are reported as being potential carcinogens, so cancer causing, they must be disclosed to the state of California, no matter how much of that ingredient is inside the product. And then for flavors and fragrance, if you have any fragrance allergens in a product above a certain threshold, you would have to be reported. So the reportable list of ingredients, it includes about 3,000 ingredients and compounds. You can find that reportable list right here at this URL. This was codified in the California Health and Safety Code, and for the fragrance allergens, so if it kind of matches the EU fragrance disclosure requirements. So if you have a fragrance allergen, and it doesn't have to be intentionally added, it can be just a compound, a naturally occurring compound of another intentionally added ingredient. We see this a lot with essential oils. So if it's in a rinse-off product at greater than 0.01%, it has to be reported, or in a leave-on product at greater than 0.001%, it has to be reported. And lastly, but not least for sure, is California's Prop 65. So California, you can learn more about it at this site right here. I'm providing the URLs to make sure people can, have as much as you want to learn, you can go in and learn. So I'm provided quite a few resources in here. But what is Prop 65? So Prop 65 provides that no person shall knowingly and intentionally expose any individual to a chemical known to the state of California to cause cancer or reproductive toxicity without first giving clear and reasonable warning to such individual. So this is what we call the Prop 65 warnings. Now, exposure to a chemical can be through any route, which includes oral or topical, such as what we see for cosmetics. And this applies to all products sold in the state of California. It doesn't matter where you are located. There are a few exemptions, the big one being that for businesses with fewer than 10 employees, they would be exempt from having to provide the warning requirements. Now, some people go, oh, well, I'll just break off, the brand, right? And they'll be just a separate business. It doesn't really work. If there's a parent company who happens to be bigger, and then you have this little company that has the brand, they would count the parent company's employees. So it's actually kind of hard to, get away with doing that kind of like shifting of employees and so forth. Now we see both enforcement by government through the California Attorney General, as well as by private litigators, or what we call bounty hunters. The two kind of categories that we see the most problem for cosmetics is both specific ingredients and then contaminants. So here are some of the ingredients that tend to be kind of big ones for the cosmetics industry. And we see a lot of action lawsuits around. And then for contaminants, so 1,4-dioxane, right? That is a contaminant that is often occurs in ethyloxylated ingredients, or formaldehyde, which I spelt wrong. I'll correct that. Gotta love that. Asbestos, like talc, asbestos is considered a contaminative. Benzene. So benzene is often formed by other ingredients coming together. For example, like ascorbic acid and sodium benzoate. It's my understanding that those two will form benzene. So you're going to want to take a look at your formulations, and it's not just, oh, well, these individual ingredients by themselves are fine. They're not on the list. Well, what do those ingredients do when they come together, right? Also, heavy metals, we see quite a bit of litigation, especially around, say, like lead, chromium, mercury. If you have a lot of natural botanical ingredients in your product, heavy metals is often a contaminant because it's in the earth. And then benzophenone, that is something that develops from octocrylene. And so we've seen quite a few, like sunscreen companies have run into a problem with the benzophenone. The Prop 65 does require warnings. There are multiple types of warnings, but, going the wrong direction. This is an example of what a short form warning would look like. And you can see these on products. It requires both this bright yellow exclamation point triangle, and then the word warning in all caps and bold, and then whatever the potential harm is, and then the address for where the Prop 65 warnings are. Now, there is some new regulations that are being considered. They're being proposed that would allow for signal words to be included, such as, California warning, or right, because this is a very California specific warning. We're not entirely sure if those will be accepted, but it does look like they probably will be. We have seen the OEHA, that's the agency that is responsible for enforcing Prop 65. We have seen them kind of start this process of changing up the warnings and then backing off and just letting it go. But it looks like this particular new regulations are going to go through. So here's some of the proposed amendments. So it would be identifying the actual name of the ingredient or compound that is causing the potential risk. So it'd be cancer risk from exposure to whatever. See this warning, right? Or can expose you to whatever the ingredient is, a carcinogen, and then see this warning. Or if there are multiple chemicals, such as, say, a carcinogen and a reproductive toxicant, here's a couple other more examples of what would be proposed that are being proposed under these short form amendments. So my suggestion would be to go back to, I'm going to get back to this website, right? And you can find all the compounds through this website, and then do a full audit of your products, formulations, to determine whether or not you have any ingredients that are on those lists. And if so, you are going to want to speak with someone knowledgeable in this area so that they can help you determine, one, is there an exposure? Do I have an exemption? Because there are multiple exemptions out there. If I do have an exposure and I don't have an exemption, what is the statement I need to use and where to use it? Because currently the regulations do not specify specifically what a reasonable warning is, but they do have some guidance. And so it's important to work with somebody who understands, those rules, so you can protect yourself. And got through a lot.
That was a lot.
It was a lot. Sorry, only 5 minutes left.
No, it's been amazing. We have a few Prop 65 questions. If there's time, we'll go to MOCRA. If not, everyone is on the call. We'll group your questions, get answers, and in the reply with the recording and the presentation, we'll answer those questions. But just quickly with Prop 65, I think you answered, is there any enforcement of Prop 65 and non-declaration on the California Safe Cosmetics list?
Is there any enforcement because of failure to disclose? We have not really seen enforcement. No, not really. I don't think that the state of California has had the budget really to do enforcement, or at least I haven't seen any. And if there is enforcement, it seems to be so far being kept hush hush. I would not be surprised, however, if we have here in California, litigation is just ridiculous. It's a very litigious state, one of the most litigious states, as well as like New York. And the plaintiffs' attorneys, they get in these like modes where they find a particular topic and like all of them just start sending demand letters, right? So I would not be surprised if eventually some plaintiff's attorney gets a hold, realizes like, oh, this would be a great way to get money, right? Because whether or not someone's registered or not is public. And so you can see whether or not someone has done their disclosures or not. And then but just because someone has disclosed, like say titanium dioxide is one of the ingredients that's, if it's in your product, it has to be disclosed to the state of California, no matter what, no matter how much of it is in your product. And then titanium dioxide of unbound, non-respirable size, that particular type of titanium dioxide, so mostly prevalent in like powders and sprays, that potentially requires a Prop 65 disclosure. But just because somebody has disclosed my product has titanium dioxide in it doesn't mean that it requires a Prop 65 warning, right? So those are two very different assessments that needs to be done. And so, just because you're over here on this list, because you've disclosed, doesn't mean you had to have this warning. And the plaintiffs know that. The plaintiffs' attorneys do know that, and they know how to look. And there's specific types of products that they tend to go after because of certain ingredients. But now, is there a plaintiff's attorney out there that has been smart enough to look, or clever enough to look at the companies that have made disclosures and then sent these notice of violations out? They don't say that that's where they found your information, but is it possible that that's what they're relying on? Certainly. I would not be surprised. So yeah, you do kind of run some risk. Well, hey, I disclosed it here because I had to disclose it, but now I've got this notice of violation for Prop 65. But that's why it's important to do the assessment. Well, do I need a disclosure, right? Do I need a warning? Because if you're selling a product, knowing that you need a warning and you're not providing the order, it's not a matter of when. I'm sorry, it's not a matter of if. It's a matter of when. Because these Prop 65 attorneys are very, very active, and all it takes is a Google search, right? To find your product. They don't even need to find it in a store. So yeah, it's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Angela, we have 1 minute left and we do have a bunch of questions. So what we'll do for everyone is just summarize those questions and come back to you. I know several people have asked. We'll be sending the recording and the presentation slides so you can refer back to all the amazing links that Angela's provided. And also Millie, Lizzie, and I would love to thank Angela for her time on behalf of the Australian government and all the Australian businesses on this call today for doing this webinar. Just really, really appreciate it. Again, any questions that anyone has afterwards, feel free to reach out to Lizzie, Millie, or myself, and we will hopefully answer it or point you in the right direction. And I guess that's it.
Would you, I know it's officially over. Would you like me to go through some of the questions? I don't mind. I have a little time if people want to stay on to get their questions answered.
Sure.
Or no.
Should we do it? Yep. Okay.
All right. Thumbs up.
Oh, yes, let's do it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I pulled up the questions. I'm going to make them even bigger because I can't see very well. All right,
can I just jump in for 1 minute here? For those people that have to leave the webinar now, because we are on the hour, we will still summarize these questions and share the answers, because I want to make sure that everyone who's asked questions has access. And of course, the recording will be shared also.
Friendly. So do you need an FEI if you're a small facility? No, because you don't have to register if you're a small facility. If you decide to register and you're a small facility, you still don't need the FEI. You would just do it and you'd say, I'm a small facility and I'm just doing this optionally. And then the FDA would provide you an FEI after that. Will other requirements be further scrutinized? The labeling, you don't have to submit your label with your product listing. So, you're not uploading it. So there's not going to be additional scrutiny because of doing a product listing. Does the website need to be a US website? It just needs to be a website that the consumer can access. So if for some reason it is a Australian website that doesn't allow the consumer to access it, then yes, you're going to want to have a website that can be accessed from the US. I am pretty sure that any Australian website addresses, as long as you have the website address, can be accessed from the United States. I've never ran into a situation where I can't access a client's website just because they happen to be in another country. What do you email for Lindell question? Don't know what Lindell's question was. So, okay, where can you view amended product listings? There's not really anywhere that you can view them. You would have to ask the person who did your product listing to download your SPL, which is what's that called? A zipped file. It's a zipped file that you would then upload into the portal. So you'd have to create your own login with the CDER, the Cosmetics Direct, and upload that zip file, and then you'd be able to see it. Or you could go to FDA's X forms and upload it there, and you could do amendments there. Are there packaging expert training? No, I already answered that. Declaration, I already got that. With stores and a job officer. Would stores add a general? Not generally. Stores do not necessarily. Would stores add a general Prop 65 warning sticker to avoid enforcement? Stores don't like to add Prop 65 warnings, so no. You do see a lot. If you've ever been to California, you will see Prop 65 warnings all over the place that you become blind to them. You don't even notice them anymore if you live here. It's pretty ridiculous. We're over disclosed is for sure. But no, stores don't usually do that. If you're selling chemical sunscreen or under the exemption sale threshold, you still need a responsible person. So sunscreens are not a cosmetic. So our discussion today was mostly, at least regarding MOCRA, is about cosmetics. Sunscreens here in the United States is a drug. So if you are importing your product, your sunscreen product into the United States, you need to understand drug listing requirements and drug facts requirements. And that's a whole different presentation. But if you need help with that, I am here. You will get a recording, listings. Thanks. Hey, is there a regulatory compliance office for FDA in Australia? I doubt it. There's not even one here in the United States. I mean, the FDA has their offices, but they don't provide any kind of support for label compliance. And if you're talking about do we have a regulatory compliance office? No, not outside the United States, but we do provide label compliance support, review, suggested revisions, and we just work, via email. We don't have a physical office. And Alana, can I recommend a contractor for what? For what activity? She just asked it, but.
Also, in the meantime, just wanted to confirm that a small business under $1 million US sales is still exempt from MOCRA.
Yes. So under MOCRA, it's if you have $1 million on average sales over 3 years. So $1 million average annual gross revenue for sales in the United States. So if you had 0 sales last year and the year before, and $1 million in sales this year, you would have $1 million divided by 3 is your average for the last 3 years, right? So you really need to get like 1 million, 1 million, and 1 million, right? So it's really your third year of hitting 1 million, where you're going to have an average of 1 million. Now, if you enter the US market this year and you sell $5 million, well, you are now over that threshold and you should do your product listings. If you are, it could be that the Customs and Border Control may start requiring like actual like your product listing numbers, especially depending on how much product you have coming through. And if that happens, I mean, you would say, well, I'm a small business. Here's our gross revenue. We haven't hit $1 million average annual gross revenue over the last 3 years yet. And then they should let your product through. So I think that answered it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of all the questions. I don't think I saw any additional ones.
Did you answer Lyndall's question about contract manufacturer doesn't have an FEI? Can you email
okay.
them? Yeah.
Yeah, you can email and represent them as third party because they refuse to register. Why do you email? Oh, who do you? In that slide, I provided there is an email address in the slide of how do you get an FEI number. It's right in the slide. So these slides will be shared with you. So
Yes.
you would email that email address, and there's a list of information that they want to see. So you would say, I am a cosmetic brand. I use a third-party manufacturer. I am selling my products in the United States. The brand, this particular company's has said that they won't register, so we're going to register for them. We need their FEI number. And this is what we think that they do. They are a contract manufacturer for cosmetics, or they also manufacture food, right? Because they do want to see like, what are the activities that are happening at this facility, right? So is that throwing your contract manufacturer on the under the bus, so to speak? Maybe, right? But if you want to be able to sell your products here in the United States, they need to register. Otherwise, if you sell the products and you know they're not registered, you are the one liable for that.
Right. Well, I think we've answered, or I should say, you've answered all the questions. And any that come through after the fact, we'll be in touch with you and get answers back to the companies.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so very much. I really do appreciate being here today. It's an honor. And